Hey guys, in this video I'm going to show you how to connect to Spotify with OAuth 2, which is an authorization method. OAuth 2 lets your users give your app access to their accounts to other services. So, for example, social sign-ons with Facebook, Google, LinkedIn, all of that kind of social connection is using OAuth 2 methods. So, and this isn't just for signing up and logging in users. Once you've been granted permission to access a user's account, you can do things like get their profile data. In this tutorial we're talking about Spotify, so we'll be able to perform a search, create playlists, and so much more on the behalf of that user's Spotify account, right? And what you can really do depends on the permission scope that's involved, but I'll get into that in just a moment. So for now I'm just going to talk about configuring your app for this type of authentication. The first thing you want to do is go to developer.spotify.com and create a new app. Okay, so you want to register your application with Spotify so that you can make requests and Spotify will know who you are. You can sign into Spotify with your own Spotify account or create a new account just for this reason, but you do have to sign in, and then you can create a new app on the developer site. Once you do that, you will be given a client ID and a client secret, okay? And you do want to treat these like passwords. Your ID is more like your account identifier, but your secret is really like a password that you want to keep protected and private. So if you go over to your API connector and set up a new API, I have mine labeled here as Spotify, and the authentication that we're using here is OAuth 2 user agent flow. The app ID and app secret fields are where I'm going to enter that client ID and client secret. So some services call them app ID, some call them client ID and secret. These are interchangeable. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this client ID, put it there, and then I'm going to copy the client secret and paste it here as well, and make sure that I don't have any spaces at the end of that. Okay. And some services will give you a separate set of ID and secret for your development version. Spotify only gives you one, so you can enter it just there in the top fields there, and you can leave these bottom ones blank. Now let's talk about scopes. Scopes are your permissions that you're asking from your user, okay? So you have to specify what type of permission you want to get access to. And Spotify's documentation has a whole section on scopes. So if you navigate to that part of the documentation site, you'll have a list of scopes here, and it describes what each one does, and also what the user is going to see when Spotify asks them to grant permission, what the permission even means. So if I were to use a scope for playlist read private, what that means is I'm asking for permission to read the authorized user's private playlist. I want to get that list of playlists from their Spotify account. And what the user will see when they're authorizing you, when they're granting you access, is this phrase here, access your private playlist. That way they know exactly what permission they're giving you. Okay, so every service should outline what scopes are available, and there should also be a label for each scope that you'll want to enter into this field here. So let's work with the playlist one, playlist-read-private. I'm going to enter that in here. And if I wanted to do multiple scopes, which you can, you just want to comma separate them, okay? And let's say I wanted to do, modify their playlist, okay? So I can say playlist modify private, and that way I can modify their private playlist. I can say playlist modify private, like that. And so now I'm requesting access under two different scopes. Okay, so that's important. A lot of services also have default scopes, so you can leave this blank if all you're interested in are the default scopes that are involved. Usually that's going to be general profile information like email, name, maybe a profile picture, something like that. But again, the documentation will tell you. Now, for the authentication, I'm going to take you to the part of the documentation here for Spotify that goes through their authorization guide. This is a really good platform to explore how OAuth 2 works, because their documentation is very clear on the order of this whole process and what everything is doing behind the scenes. When you're filling out this form, you're basically providing all the information that Bubble needs to properly format the request, and Spotify and Bubble will kind of talk to each other to trigger this entire authorization process so that ultimately the user has given you access and you can ultimately make calls on their behalf and work with their Spotify data. But there are a number of steps involved, and I do want to walk through the kind of high-level points from this guide so that you understand what everything is. Okay, so just kind of as a super high level, what's happening is your user is going to go to your app. They're going to click a button that says connect to Spotify. Your app will take them to Spotify temporarily, and they'll see a login screen. It'll be a permission prompt, and Spotify will say, hey, this app wants to get your permission to do the following things, and then it'll list out those permission descriptions, and those are all the scopes that you've indicated. The user can then accept or decline. If they accept, Spotify will send the user back to your app with an access token, and that access token is a representation of the authorized user. Okay, so that way, going forward, any calls you make to the API that need to involve the user's account information, that you supply the access token as well to let Spotify know that they've given you authorization, they've given you permission, and you don't have to work with, the user's actual credentials, their password and username or anything like that. This way it's safe and secure for everybody involved, for you, the user, and for Spotify. Okay, so again, the user comes to your app, they click a button to connect. You then trigger navigating them to Spotify. Spotify says, hey, this is the permission that this app is requesting. Is that okay? The user will say yes. Spotify will say, great, I'm going to send you back there now with an access token for that application to use for anything involving you. And then they come back and then they're authorized, and then you can move forward from there. Okay, so this API authorization guide outlines that entire flow, obviously in much greater detail. Actually, here's a cool little flow chart that you can see things broken down even more. And studying this would be really beneficial for you to just kind of understand a little bit more about what's going on in the background, so that this becomes less gibberish and more puzzle pieces that make sense when they come together. Okay, so if we go stepping through one by one through this guide, we'll actually end up filling out all the fields that we need. Okay, so let's do that. The first step is that the application needs to request authorization. So the user needs to be taken to that login screen on Spotify's platform. So this is the URL that they want to go to, accounts.spotify.com/authorize. And here we have it inserted here for the login dialog redirect. Now, Spotify actually happens to be the placeholder default for the OAuth 2 authentication whenever you create a new API in Bubble's API connector. As soon as you select this OAuth 2, it's actually going to pre-fill with Spotify info. So I happen to be demoing through Spotify right now just because it is pretty straightforward if you follow the guide step by step. And other services are generally going to follow the same principle, but you do need to keep their documentation open and make sure that you're getting all of the endpoints and all of these things right. We're going to work with Spotify right now just because it is one of the more straightforward ones. So again, step one, this is the URL, it's accounts.spotify.com/authorize. All right, and then, oops, let's go a little further down here. Okay, and if you're doing this manually, you'll have to work with all of these other fields and stuff, but that's what Bubble's doing for you. Bubble's actually doing a lot of the heavy lifting, and that's why you have all of these other fields a part of this form, because Bubble is just going to, you just insert the information and Bubble will format everything properly in the way that Spotify needs it, and in general in the way that platforms need it for OAuth 2 methods. All right, so now step 2, the user is going to be asked to authorize access within the scope. So we already went through that. They're going to see those messages and they'll understand what you're asking for. And number 3, the user is going to be redirected back to your app at a specific URL. Okay, now this URL needs to be approved by Spotify. You need to let Spotify know that your app is using this URL. So the way that you do that is you need to go to your dashboard where you created your application and go into your settings. Okay, and you've got a couple of settings here. You can add your website, and under that there's a redirect URIs, and you can add multiple here. So basically what you want to enter here is any URL in your application that's going to be triggering this authorization workflow. And I'm talking about anything, your test and your live versions. So I'm going to go ahead and add mine. It's coachingsandbox.bubbleapps.io version test. I'm going to copy that because I'm going to do a couple versions of this. Okay, and also remember that if you are starting out on the Bubble hosted URL, you need to come back in here and update this if you switch over to a custom domain as well. Now I'm going to add another one with the debugger on, and we're going to talk about why in a second. Bubble actually requires you to initialize this whole thing with the debugger, so definitely make sure you add a URI with the debugger. Okay, so I have my two versions there. This is my index page, the version test, and then the index page with the debugger, right? And then we'll hit save. Don't forget to save. There we go. All right, so yeah, so the next step after they've been asked for access and they accept, they'll be taken back to that URI. And then after that, this is what's going to happen kind of in the background, is that your application is going to request an access token. So Spotify has approved this person, and now you want to get an access token for that user. So you need to, what's going to happen is Bubble's going to make a call to this token endpoint. So all you need to worry about with this form that you're filling out is the endpoint for the token call. So I'm going to copy that. And yeah, I keep forgetting it's already in here. So that's where you're going to put it in, is the access token endpoint, right? So now let's keep going through the steps here. Spotify will send back the token. All right, so now the next parts of the documentation are going to talk about how we use the access token and how it's formatted. So this first checkbox here, authentication, goes in the header. This is asking us, all right, so in all of our calls that we're making to Spotify, where are we actually placing this access token? Well, if I go into the authorization guide, and I'm going to skip the previous step, step 5, but step 6 here, use the access token to access the Spotify web API. I need to see where that token is being placed, and it looks like it's going in the header here. So H here stands for header. This is an example request, and here is the example request is going to the me endpoint, which is the endpoint for the authorized user, so that you can get basic information about the authorized user, just the top level stuff. And I can see that the access token is going into the header there under the key authorization, and the value it has the word bearer in front of the key. Okay, so the colon actually separates the key and the value. Okay, the key is authorization, the value is bearer with a space plus your access token. Now again, Bubble's going to handle this formatting and placing it in the header for you. So you just need to check this off, because we can see that it goes in the header, and that the header key is authorization colon bearer, like that. And Bubble, when it receives the access token, will insert it after bearer there, so that you've kind of set it up for Bubble there. Okay, now token is returned as a query string. Now let's see how the response comes in for when we request that access token, which is actually step 5 here. So the tokens are returned to your application. We can see here that the token is not in a query string. If it was, you'd see ampersands. This would be a part of the URL, and it's not. It's kind of in its own data set here in the body of the response, okay, because we actually have several pieces, access tokens there. It's telling me what the token type is. It's you know, confirming the scope, and so now in our checkbox for token is returned as a query string, we can leave that unchecked because we see that it's not a part of a query string. As far as requesting an access token uses basic auth goes, we're going to leave that unchecked as well. That's something that the documentation would say specifically, that it's using basic auth, and we're not doing that. Okay, and then we need to fill out the user profile endpoint, because this whole process, how Bubble handles OAuth 2 connections, is through a sign-up method. Okay, so Bubble needs to retrieve an email from the user. It requires an email for a user, so it must make this call to the user profile endpoint in order to get that user's email address. Okay, so we need to find the endpoint for the user. This our sample here actually provides it for us. We can see that it's api.spotify.com v1 me. If you didn't have this in your authorization guide for another service, just go to the reference for all the endpoints in general. So here's Spotify's, and you can see all the resources and all the endpoints that are available. And if you go over to, let's see if we can find it here, we want the profile for the current user. That's going to be the current authorized user. There we go. So here's that profile, and you can find that endpoint there as well. All right, so that information is going to be there, and then Bubble wants to be able to identify the actual ID value for that user and the email, so it knows, you know, exactly where to extract the data. So you just need to identify the key names for the ID and for the user's email. So again, if I go back to the endpoint for the current user's profile and navigate to the different values, the different values that come with the user object, I just want to find the email and the ID. Here's the email. It's also written as a lowercase email like that, so that's good, like that. And then I want to find the, oh, that's the scopes, and I want to find the ID, and this is also just lowercase ID. That's typically what it's going to be for most services, but you know, double check your documentation. If you ever get an error, just make sure that you have everything written exactly the way that the service specifies. Okay. All right, now the next piece to getting this rolling here is you need to initialize this entire process by running the connection in with the debugger on. Okay, now this is a Bubble requirement. This has nothing to do with Spotify or any other services. This is just how Bubble needs to be able to make the connections. So in order to do that, and that's what this whole warning message here is saying, in order to do that, we're going to add a button to the page, which I've got here, and we're going to start a workflow. And let me remove this so I can show you where to go. You're going to use the sign up login with a social network. Okay, that way you can select your OAuth provider, and any of your APIs in the API connector that you've created with OAuth 2 authentication is going to show up here. So I'm going to select Spotify, and then you don't have anything else to set up there. So now you just want to preview the page. Make sure, number one, that it's the exact same URL as you entered in one of your redirect URIs, and also that the debugger is on. The debugger needs to be on just for this one test. You need to do this once only for initializing the whole call. Once you've initialized it properly, then you don't need to, you know, run. You don't need to. The debugger is not the requirement for triggering this action. Let me just label my button to Spotify. Okay, and refresh. Okay, so I'm going to click connect to Spotify, and it should take me to Spotify's login screen. I have in the legal scope. Ooh, that's no good. How about we, I'm going to try this without a comma in between. I'm looking at the, let's see, where is it here? The documentation for scopes, and I'm looking at their example requests, and I can see here under scopes there is no comma in between that separates them. Sometimes it is a comma, usually actually it is a comma, but sometimes they'll have no comma. So let's try that. Let's preview the page. I've also seen semicolons and the pipeline, that vertical character separating scopes, so definitely double check, make sure. Let's see if that worked. Yeah, that one did it. Okay, so yeah, for Spotify we want to leave the scopes without a comma in there. All right, so I can see here that Spotify, so now I'm on the login URL, that's what we provided, and now Spotify can say, oh great, okay, so we've identified the app, so they can display my app's name there, and they've identified it through the client ID, because you can see that Bubble inserted all this stuff into the request URL there. And here's my description for my app that I entered in the console when I registered my application. And this is the message that I'm getting based on the scope. Coaching Sandbox will be able to receive this Spotify account data. Okay. Now, when I hit OK, I'm going to be taken back to my app. And if all is well, you'll get the successful message here that says you are connected. And now, going forward, any calls that you set up in the Spotify plugin settings there, you can set them up normally as you would. You don't have to worry about the access token or anything. The access token is going to be sent with that call request every single time, because now you've successfully initialized. Also keep in mind that your user doesn't need to trigger this connection with the debugger on. The debugger is purely for just getting Bubble to initialize everything. So actually when you hit OK there, you'll see this message here it's no longer that warning message. It's going to say that the API is correctly set up, and you can use calls in production as you would with anything else. Okay, so that's how you set up an OAuth 2 integration with any service where you want to get access to a user's account and be able to perform actions and read data on behalf of that user. I do really recommend that you study the authorization guides that come with the documentation for the services. They generally break down the entire flow for you, and if you understand how it works, it will start to become a little bit easier to set up everything and to configure everything, because you're not so much in the dark then. Okay, but if you have any questions at all, please reach out and I'd be happy to help you. Thanks for watching.